Ers kungliga höghet, kronprinsessan Victoria. Daniela Bas från Förenta Staterna. It's a great honor for us to welcome you to this event. Warmly welcome. Övriga talare kommer jag vända mig till efterhand. Ni är alla varmt välkomna att fira en 75-åring. Det står att Funktionsrätt Sverige fyller 75 år. Ja, det stämmer därför att vi bytte namn på organisationen som fyller 75 år igår eftermiddag. Och när det här bildades 1942, då var det framåtsyftande beteckningen Samarbetskommittén för partiellt arbetsföra. Fundera ett ögonblick på det. Och så ska jag berätta att en av våra prioriterade frågor de senaste åren och de närmaste 2 åren kommer att vara arbete och försörjning. En del frågor tar tid att lösa fullt ut. Några steg på vägen har tagits naturligtvis, men det återstår en del att göra. Och nu har jag efterträtts av Lars Ohly, som nu inleder nästa 75-årsperiod. Lars Ohly ska också känna sig särskilt varmt välkommen i vår krets. Nu först, Daniela Bas, very welcome to give us your speech. Daniela är, det säger jag på svenska, hon är chef för avdelningen för socialpolitik och utveckling. Det finns en förkortning på det, den hoppar jag över. FNs departement för ekonomiska och sociala frågor, och det finns en förkortning på det också. Jag har förstått att det inte är särskilt många ledningsnivåer mellan henne och generalsekreteraren. Så ni ska känna er hedrade att de ville komma till oss och hålla det här anförandet idag.
Good afternoon. Years ago, I think it was May or June in 1987, when I was much younger, I came to Sweden. So this is my second time actually, and I was a junior professional officer at the United Nations. Very proud of being employed. Because in those years, in some parts of Europe, compared to Sweden, that has always been top when it comes to the well-being and the welfare of its people, it was very difficult in many parts of Europe to study if you had a disability and then to be employed. And I remember that the dean at the university, I studied political science, international politics in Italy, Trieste, northeast of Italy. I was sharing with him my concerns. And then, to make a long story short, I ended up working at the United Nations. I started working there in 1986. What a relief. To be graduated, having a disability since the age of 6, I had a very rare cancer, pressing on the spine, a cancer that only 2 children usually per 1 million have, and it's a neuroblastoma, and the possibility of survival is close to 0. So I thought, I have a mission. And my mission is to do the things I love. The mission is to make my life a happy life. That's my mission. Then I have also a professional mission that brought me here today, and in Sweden also 30 years ago. And then there is also another mission, which is to honor the efforts made by my parents to empower me through studies and education and care and leisure and fun. So to empower me and then to enable me with the tools they gave me to empower others. So this is my personal mission. So I combine as a professional both things, my work, my life, and my passions. And so here I am, 30 years ago in Sweden, And there was a very important conference that Sweden organized at European level about celebrating the first 5 years of the United Nations decade in those years called of disabled persons. That's what we used to say in those years. And before that, it was the handicapped, etc., etc. Nowadays, the focus is more and more on the person, at least within the United Nations language. And when I say United Nations language, I mean 193 countries. They are the members that create the organization. Nations united in an organization, United Nations organization. So they decide how they want to run the organization and what are the key aspects of needed to promote the welfare and the well-being of people. And in Sweden, 30 years ago, I remember seeing a person with a mental disability talking about persons with mental disabilities. I was amazed. To me, that showed how much this country was already so much advanced. Yet, I do believe that there is always room for improvement. And I believe that this organization, with this new name, celebrating its 75 years, is doing that because of looking at disability nowadays in Sweden, in the contemporary world, where there might be room for improvement. Usually my people prepare my speech and then I always do whatever I want to say. So allow me to go back to what I am supposed to be sharing with you, but I will now and then just, navigate through who I am in reality, which is somebody who loves communicating. And I think that what we want to hear is, besides what the United Nations is doing and how this can impact the life of persons with disabilities in Sweden, and how then civil society can strengthen and support the endeavors of Sweden in implementing whatever relates to persons with disabilities, starting from the conference on the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, known as the CRPD, moving towards what we have now, which is a very ambitious agenda. These 193 countries decided, including Sweden, therefore, to reach 17 goals with 169 targets, very ambitious agenda, by the year 2030. So this is why we call it the 2030 agenda. But we will go to that in a moment. So, Excellencies, ladies, gentlemen, a few friends by now, let me start by thanking the Swedish Disability Federation for convening this very important Congress to celebrate 75 years of work, hard work. I mean, 75 years is almost 3/4 of a century. It's a big achievement. And I believe that what you are trying to achieve with the name, and the name per se represents actually a cultural change, swift, is to unite what used to be the medical model to what is becoming and translating into the social model. And so it's not anymore solidarity, which is important, but it is actually real participation and inclusion, mainstreaming. Dignity that applies to everybody. Non-discrimination that applies to everybody. Acknowledging us for our worth, for our abilities, for the way we function, for our rights and our duties as citizens. I would love today, and this is, I believe, what drives this new federation, to leave the dis at home and bring the ability here. I believe this is what we want. Okay? So to look at what we are able to do, what we like to do, what our potential is, what our skills are, and strengthen those. By doing this, we strengthen also the community where we live in. And if we feel well, automatically, our family feels well, the community feels well, the government feels well, finance feels well, economy feels well, because by promoting inclusion and respect and dignity, we mainstream disability and we try to make sure that accessibility is for everybody. And when I say accessibility, I mean accessibility to health, accessibility to fun and leisure, accessibility to tourism, transportation, technology, jobs, education, whatever surrounds us. Now, by doing that, automatically, we are also facilitating life of others. So think of the type machine, for those of you who are old enough to remember the typewriter, right? The others don't know what I'm talking about. So it's an old version of the keyboard of a computer. Now, do we know that we do have the typewriter nowadays, keyboard of the computer, thanks to the creation of a machine used for persons who were visually impaired? Mm-hmm. And many other inventions and things that we are using nowadays, giving them for granted, have been thought and created to facilitate life of persons with disabilities. Jacuzzi. In Italian, we pronounce it jacuzzi, because actually those who invented it were Italians in California. Their mother, now you know the jacuzzi nowadays is a beautiful bath, where you have bubbles and massage and everything. But actually, why was it created? Because the mother of these, the mother of these young children, I mean, not children, young men, who were farmers and moved to California, and they were irrigating the fields with water. Now, she suffered from rheumatisms and arthritis. And doctors said that she would have needed to have this massage made with water. So they used the skills as peasants, thinking of how they were irrigating the fields. And they put those pipes in the tub, the first bubbles. That's how it started. So I could share with you much more. But what I'm trying to say here is that everybody, in different ways, has abilities and can function. Even a person, and I'm saying this because I had a conversation yesterday on this, who apparently is not moving, is not talking, mentally is unable to function as we consider it, even that person adds something good. Medical doctors are employed because they are taking care of that person, even though apparently that person has no abilities and no skills. Still brings good. Orthopedicians are producing a special bed for that person, work for others. Pharmaceutical industry is producing medicines for that person. And maybe sometimes that person, in order to be supported, is uniting a family. So you see, we all, in different ways, even when apparently we're not giving anything to the society, we're giving a lot. Going back to the teepees. So I do believe that besides the international normative framework, this is what you're trying to do, to unite solidarity with integration, with inclusion, with looking at abilities and disabilities, and above all, to see how the environment can be modified wherever we can, to remove those obstacles that once removed might allow a person to function much better, and not just function in terms of producing something, but to be included. Now, why am I here today? I would like to share with you some of the things we do and the portfolio I have. The Department of Economic and Social Affairs at the United Nations in New York is a department that deals with policy and norms. So what we do, we try to give advice to governments. And so in my division, I host, and it houses for the whole United Nations system, vulnerable groups like aging for the whole UN, youth for the whole UN, persons with disabilities, indigenous peoples, the family, as well as cooperatives. And when we think of these groups, we think about reducing poverty for persons with disabilities, for young people, for older people, indigenous peoples, etc., social integration and inclusion, and of course, decent jobs, and reducing the gap of social inequalities. So all of this, I believe, is also part of your portfolio. Reducing poverty. If you don't study, if you're not healthy, if places are not accessible in terms of transportation, employment, education, vocational training, whatever, the person cannot be employed. By not being employed, that person is condemned by the society like a prisoner to poverty, to isolation, to depression. Do we realize what we are doing to many people in the world? I think of the world, but in Sweden maybe as well. A person, because of his or her disability, is condemned to a life prison without even a trial. That's what we do. And that's what you are doing here, avoiding that is going to keep happening and happening and happening. I think this is what we do. And Crown Princess Victoria, if I may, been very much engaged in promoting the Sustainable Development Goals in specific areas, I believe, has also this very heavy, important responsibility. Because when it comes to the, as I said, we can change maybe the slide now. When it comes to the 2030 agenda with its 17 goals, many of these include, finally, the word disability to be mainstreamed. So when we talk about a world that has an environment that enables everybody in different ways to be able to enjoy and also to produce, 3 examples come to my mind. Let's think about urban development. Urban development, we know that the world is getting older and older in terms of demography. So it's very important, actually, what we do. We look also at disabling conditions, not necessarily disability as it is known or defined, at least, by the World Health Organization. So the world is moving more and more towards cities. In the next 30, 40 years, the majority of the world, 60% of the world, will be living in urban areas. What are we doing? Even here, I noticed that Stockholm is growing in terms of population. It means that many people are migrating towards the city, urban areas. So what are we doing to make sure that the population living in urban areas will have the accessibility, the usability, and the sustainability that is required? Now, if we do something to improve life of persons with disabilities, automatically it will improve and benefit the whole community. So this is one aspect. As I said, by the year 2050, 66% of the world population will be living in cities. Nowadays, we have 7 billion people populating the planet Earth, of which approximately 1 billion have a disability, 80% living in developing countries, 20% living in developed countries. So when it comes to urban planning, so I go to the environment again. The environment is the working environment, the family environment, the school environment. There are many environments. And of course also nature, climate, forests, parks. So we have to keep that in mind. Urban constructions, facilities, and services should be designed and built following accessibility or inclusive universal design. And these principles are extremely important in the very early stages of our planning. You see, if we think of natural disasters, for instance, we can move on. Next, please. Next, because I spoke already a lot. Next. Okay, so Sendai. So I said, if we think of natural disasters, I don't think that you had so many yet, luckily, in Sweden. But if we think of other parts of the world, natural disasters are horrifying. And think of what happened in Japan a few years ago with the tsunami. Many people lost their lives. In general, if you have a disability, it's much easier that you won't survive, you won't make it, you won't escape. Or there are many people who acquire a disability because of a natural disaster. So again, disability can come in different forms. And one of our duties is also to make sure that we try to live in peace and in safe environments, because conflicts cause lots of disabilities, lots. Not only during the conflict, also afterwards. Bombs, mines. You just step on it, boom, and you acquire a disability, even 15 years or 20 years after the conflict is over. So the Sendai framework has told us how important it is to make sure that when we plan, we have to plan an environment, a city, a place, transportation, etc., that is allowing everybody, hopefully, as many as possible, to survive. In Japan, what happened during the tsunami, there were 2 small cities where almost nobody died. Why? Well, in my portfolio, I also have indigenous peoples. Indigenous peoples still have very good ties and communication with Mother Earth. And they could read the signals in time in that village. Not only, but people who had different kinds of disabilities, also mental ones, mild ones, were trained to go, and they were given in adoption 10 families each. So that when there is an announcement, an alarm, and you're hearing impaired, you cannot hear the alarm. You can't. If there are television broadcasts, with the subtitles, and maybe nobody's saying anything, there are just the subtitles, and you're visually impaired, you can't read, escape, escape, escape. You can't. So they trained everybody in that community. Everybody had a function, everybody had an ability, everybody had a right, and everybody had a duty to support the community. So when there were these signals, the indigenous on one hand and the alarm on the other hand, etc., these people with mild mental disabilities went to the families they had adopted, knocking at doors, making sure that everybody could escape. Isn't that wonderful? This is another example. Now, we can move on. So invest in accessibility is key. And so we know that because, moving on, the United Nations also took other initiatives, such as the one that took place last year in Ecuador, Habitat 3. It's a conference that takes place every 10 or 20 years. Amazing. So again, accessibility, design was key. And all of this, you can move on. All of this thanks to what started happening back in 1945, almost as old as this organization. So thanks to that, the United Nations were created. And then there was the Commission for Social Development, created in 1946, and goes on and on and on. We had the International Year of the Persons with Disabilities in 81. Then from 1983 to 92, I believe, there was the decade for persons with disabilities. And then we move on and on and on with the Copenhagen Summit. And from the Copenhagen Summit on Social Development, we move up to 2006. We have the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, amazingly signed by so many countries in so few years. It very seldom happens. And then from CRPD, the Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, signed also by Sweden, we moved to the year 2013, when there was the high-level political forum of heads of state at the United Nations, the very first one in the history of the United Nations, on disability and development. So you see, from the rights key, the world is moving more and more towards the social and the development and the sustainability. So the rights are still there, they're key. But once you have the rights, you have also to find ways to implement them, to transfer them into reality. So with that document signed by heads of state in 2013, we made sure that in the Sustainable Development Goals, that is the 2030 Agenda, and these are so far most of the countries that have ratified the convention, by the way, 170, can't remember now the exact number. Somebody told me the number this morning, by the way, who is not a UN person. Thank you, 175 out of 193. I mean, this is really amazing. So the United Nations decided that it was key to think of a world that is in constant development, change. The world is changing, right? And it needs to find ways to keep developing, but in a sustainable manner. Something that can, by itself, self-fulfill itself, okay? Self-realize itself. And so they decided to have 17 goals. The beauty of the 2030 Agenda is that it is universal. Universal. So when we talk about poverty, health, education, equality, or else, employment, etc., it's universal for everybody, depending on where you live. Maybe the definition of poverty here, or poverty related to a person with a disability in Sweden, is different than the one in Botswana, or in Vietnam, or in Peru, or in Italy, where I come from, right? But still it's poverty for that country. So this is why it's universal. It's not anymore for developing or emerging countries. It's for the world, for the benefit of the world. And this agenda is an agenda that is accountable, meaning governments have tasked themselves to implement this agenda by the year 2030, 17 goals. And so when they meet during the General Assembly, they have to be accountable to the other members, to the other governments, and tell them where they stand. And here, civil society and organizations and federations like yours can play a key role in supporting, not contrasting, supporting the endeavors of your country in implementing these goals. And you can do that from the disability perspective. Support your country. Help your country to achieve the goals so that when your country comes to the United Nations, is accountable and can say, I am doing it. These are good practices. These are projects I am implementing. I can lead you. I can guide you. Look at what I'm doing. And maybe I can inspire you, right? So I think this is what your organization, your federation, with this new name and this new ambition can do to support Sweden in achieve the Sustainable Development Goals when it comes to disability. And here it is. I said, disability is clearly stated in many of these goals and in many targets, because each goal has baby steps. These baby steps are called targets. 169 targets. So each goal has approximately 10 little targets, yeah? Little steps. Look, goal 4, about guaranteeing equal and accessible education by building inclusive learning environments and providing the needed assistance for persons with disabilities. It is written there, goal 4, upfront. 8, promoting inclusive economic growth, full and productive employment, allowing persons with disabilities to fully access the job market. There. 10, emphasizing the social, economic, and political inclusion of persons with disabilities. 11, creating accessible cities and water resources, affordable, accessible, and sustainable transport systems, providing universal access to safe, inclusive, accessible, and green public spaces. 17, this is very important. Underline the importance of data collection and monitoring of the SDGs. Emphasis on disability, disaggregated data. If you have statistics, disaggregated data, disaggregated statistics. Disaggregated, it means how many persons who use wheelchairs, how many persons who have mental health, how many, okay, so that's disaggregated, it's not disability in general. This helps policymakers to decide what are the best policies needed, what are the social political frameworks needed at national level to implement laws, etc. And the goal 17 is very important for countries because it talks about partnerships. Countries have to partner together to implement the 17 goals. So the way forward, well, I believe that we have to find the new ways because you see, countries decided what is needed, but how to do that? So here, civil societies, again, can be instrumental in showing ways to policymakers on how to implement now these 17 goals, how to do that together. And then we can see how we can implement those SDGs, all of them, but particularly those I mentioned where disability is clearly targeted, how it can be included in the SDGs and then into the political frameworks at national level and promote global partnerships, including civil society and the private sector. You see, the private sector is talking about corporate social responsibility and also rights, also human rights within the private sector. But the private sector is given its own definition. And the international world, the United Nations is in this case, has also its own definition. The point is that the speed is different. The speed is different. So what can we do in order for everybody to keep evolving and developing in a sustainable manner, but keeping a dialogue? Otherwise, at a certain point, the difference of speed is so huge that instead of reducing the gaps of inequalities, economic, social, environmental, political, cultural, we won't have anymore the possibility to build such a long bridge. So engage with the private sector. Explain to the private sector that what has been decided at international level by your country, like a rainfall, sooner or later, will impact this country as well. So what can you do together to have a win-win situation? So this is a task I let you think about. And I would like to end with a Confucius saying. Confucius says, and apologies for those who have different kind of disabilities than mine. And it's not me, it's Confucius. He said, what I hear, I forget. What I see, I remember. What I do, I understand. So let's do things together. Thank you.